you could always hear my mother explain without explaining and that I was adopted. So for example, we go to the doctor, I'm 10 years old, my mother's there to see the doctor, not me. I'm with her, and he says to me, "How come you don't look like your mother?" And I look at my mother, and I look back at the doctor, and my mother says, "Oh, that's our little secret." And I looked at her and I thought, I didn't know being adopted was a secret. And so from that moment on, there was that cloud of, shh, we don't talk about this, it's a secret. So the cloud of shame. So there were subtle ways that she would always remind me that I was adopted. And treatment-wise, I one time felt so disengaged from her emotionally as a mother that I was a young child, not knowing, I called her Ruth by her first name, like everybody else did, Auntie Ruth, and she just gave me the dirtiest look, like, how dare you? But so there's always that, touchy subject of this is an adoption situation. We don't talk about it. I grew up in Southern California, but I grew up in Ventura, kind of close to the coast. You could see the ocean every day from the windows. My mother is a very talented woman. She was constantly creating things, paintings, pottery, ceramics. She ended up starting a wedding catering business in Ventura. My father has been an electrician for Southern California Edison, and he started that job when they were first married, and he retired from that job in 1983. So they treated me the only way they knew how to parent, good things and bad things. I think the curiosity that you mentioned really kicked in at age 11. I remember my mother sitting on her bed, and I guess her and Dad had a fight or something, and she just started crying. And I felt bad. I had deep compassion for her, so I loved her. And that little voice in my head, in my soul just said, "She's using you. She's using you." I knew then, through that spiritual, that little voice saying, "You need to leave. It's not the healthiest place for you." So in 1976, I go back to California for a visit. I was living in Utah at the time. And my mother went and got out of the closet someplace her special paperwork that she kept on us, which was the petition of adoption and a medical document that showed my mother's signature, my biological mother's signature on it. And so there I learned her name. Her name was Sylvia A. Morris. So then I had a name. So from that, for the next umpteen years, the next 20 years, I was always searching, and the same loneliness, it just would never leave. I just ached for a functional family or a mother to love me. Not a mother, but my mother. When I got married, I then started searching more. So I would search intermittently. The searches would resurface at certain intervals. Loneliness was the biggest one. I'd get lonely, this ache, this emptiness that I couldn't satisfy, even though I had a husband who loved me, who loves me and still does, had 3 wonderful children. So it just would ebb and flow, and it all tied into loneliness and emptiness, and I could never fill that gap. And so at the point when I found, I was 43 years old. For whatever reason that day, I sat down and I read the newspaper. And I read every word of the newspaper, not just picture to headline and subtitles. I literally went through and I read every word of that newspaper. I should have saved it, but I didn't. And somewhere back in the community section, I found this little itty bitty 1 inch ad. And it said the search triad. And it was just, if you're separated by a divorce or a foster care or adoption, contact, and here's the number. That 1 inch ad is what got me started. What they do is they try to find the mother first. And because that list produced nothing, then they go after the male name, if there's one. And I had my brother's name on this non-identifying information. And from there, I called him, talked to his fiance. So then Betty gave me the phone number of an uncle And he talked to me and he told me where my mother was and that she was in a mental institution in California for the mentally ill. And that didn't ever faze me. So that's how I met my mother.
What was it like meeting your mom for the first time?
It was very surreal. It was not like what you would expect. Comforting, but discomforting. And I say that because when you meet a mentally ill person, they have boundaries. She was sitting in a wheelchair and I came up from behind her because my brother introduced me slowly, and so we didn't frighten her. And so I just sat down on this little brick wall that was not right next to her. So for that moment, I was happy, but I knew inside I was very calm and I was very respectful. And then I thought, okay, and I didn't think she was mentally ill at all. She was funny, she was articulate, she didn't drool on herself, you know, she looked good. She's just an old woman sitting in a wheelchair, and she was happy. She was the jolliest old lady that I'd ever met. And when we went away from that meeting, Blake and I, my husband, you know, it was like, she is happy. She is happier than your adopted mom. And my mother, my adopted mom, had everything in the world that she would need, and she was not happy. So Sylvia, who lived on the streets for 20 years, had these two children, had sent them away to live with an uncle, had me, gave me up. This was a happy woman. Not that she was happy about those things, but she knew how to live in the moment. And that's what made her happy. No, I don't want to puff. Those things will kill you. It doesn't matter though, huh? No, I don't want to puff. Those things will kill you. I knew she existed because it was on the adoption paperwork that there were two children, and they're both older than me, she by 7 years and he by 9 years. And then Uncle Wendell, who I had made contact with on the phone, told me about Laura Jane, and she's also in a mental institution, but in a separate facility. For whatever reason, something happens, and I don't know the event, but I think what happened was that she came home stoned on something, and she was crawling on the floor like a dog and threatening her mother, saying, "You should be afraid of me." So this is what Sylvia's told me at the time. And so Sylvia called the cops, and I think the cops took her from there, and I think she got into the mental institution system in California and has never left. She's been there since she was in her 20s, early 20s. And so meeting Laura Jane was just, you know, frosting on the cake. I wasn't prepared for the meeting with Laura Jane. I was prepared, but you don't study for this kind of thing. It was a joy to be able to communicate with her. So we went to leave after these 4 hours, and I gave her a big hug goodbye. And she says, "Okay, bye," you know, and she runs over to her little brick wall and sits down. And then she starts doing this, just like what you see in the movies, okay? And so I walk by and I start to get emotional because I've always wanted a sister, always. I've always wanted an older sister because I wanted someone to rescue me. And she couldn't do that for me, but I could do something for her. So I'm walking out, and I'm getting a little emotional just thinking about it. I'm walking out of this double-gated compound, small. There's 103 residents. I'm overwhelmed with what these 2 days have brought in my life. And just as I'm about ready to hit the gate, she jumps up, runs over to me, and gives me a big kiss and a big hug. So we embraced, and I could touch something that was real. It wasn't my mother, it was my sister. So, excuse me. So here I am. I have a mentally ill mother, I have a normal brother, and I have the sister that I've always wanted. So it's like, dear God, what do I do with this? You know, couldn't really quite process it. But as I walked out those gates and I got to the parking lot, I knew within an instant that if I had been left in that family, I would not be alive today. And I knew that then at age 43. And it's not one of those stories you make up in your head and, you know, because of a lot of books I've read or anything like that, because I'm not a novel reader. I was more of a self-help reader. And I knew at that moment, beyond anything else, that I would have not survived in that family. And that's why I was adopted. That's why I was put up for adoption and then put into this other family. Even though that family was complicated and difficult, the Lord knew I could survive. And that's what He gave me. Took me from one and put me in another. And that's what I call God's safety net, adoption. And I feel grateful, very grateful. But I'm more grateful because now I got to meet them. Made me cry. The story's so huge, you know, to share just little snippets, it's hard. Someday I'll write all this down. I mean, I have a lot of it written down, but I do love sharing my story, so I appreciate you being able to take the time to ask, because it's not an easy subject, especially when it comes to mental illness and drug abuse and, you know, unwanted pregnancies and things like that. I just know for certain that this is not a story I could have written or even dreamt of. In my entire life as an adoptee, could have never fathomed that this would be the result of what God has given me. And I know without a shadow of a doubt that God is in everybody's life and He guides our paths. And it's amazing where this path has taken me. And I'm so grateful for it.